Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Being Formed podcast. My name is Adam. I'm the host of this show, as well as the president and co-founder of LifePoint Resources, along with my wife, Rebecca. Together, we want to wish you a happy Easter. You know, Easter weekend just happened a couple days ago. I was in Kansas with Rebecca. We were visiting our son, our daughter-in-law, our two granddaughters. And on Sunday morning, we began the trek home. But first, we stopped in Salina, Kansas, where I was able to deliver an Easter reflection to a church there. And the reflection was called, "What is God Like?" And that's the name of this episode as well. I want to share the essence of that reflection with you now. That question first came my way really when I read a book by Lacy Finn Borgo called Faith Like a Child. She says she often will bring children together and she'll ask that question, what is God like? Then she'll quietly listen, give them space to listen and think and process and imagine. And then she'll just let them share whatever bubbles up. In her book, she says, a little girl named Leslie said, once when I was outside and looking at the clouds, I saw a big storm come in, and I think God is like that, a big storm. She says she's heard answers like, God's like a grandmother, like a wizard, like a protector, like a friend. So I asked that question as well at the onset of this Easter reflection, and there were children in the room as well as adults. I just encouraged them to use the blank sheets of paper and to begin to draw and to use some of the colored pencils. The answer to their question, what is God like? Lacy, in her book, goes on to talk about that question as a question that pulses underneath our everyday living and rises to the surface when we experience the intensity of pain, suffering, joy, and love. And I'm quoting from her book there. She goes on to say, it's in childhood we begin to ask this question, whether consciously or unconsciously. And the question is interwoven with our fundamental questions around attachment and safety. She says the adults who hold power to keep us safe and healthy also shape our pictures of God. And she says, yep, we've likely got more than one picture. Last episode, I shared my own story to kind of help answer that question, what is soul care? And if you listen to that, you'll remember in there, I talked about a fundamental question I carried with me into ministry. Two questions, really. What is God like? I would have said, who is God? And the other one was, who am I? But really that question is like, what is the picture I had of God going into ministry? My answer was very clearly like a police officer. I was afraid of being pulled over, of being found to be guilty, of being caught, And so I had this image of God like that. She just says in her book, parents, grandparents, pastors, teachers, and family friends all contribute to our pictures of God. And this imprinting can be a good thing when the adults keep us safe and healthy, but when they don't care for us well, our pictures of God can get a little messed up. So I just wanted to present that question to you as well here at the beginning of this Easter week. What is God like? According to all four gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Mary of Magdala was one of several women who awoke very early in the morning on the first day of the week, and she went to the tomb where Jesus' lifeless body had been placed. Each gospel account, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, includes variations of the account, including the various names of the women who were with her. Hint, hint, a lot of them were named Mary. But all four accounts are in agreement that Mary of Magdala, Mary Magdalene, was the first of Jesus' disciples to bear witness to something truly stunning, something amazing. Mary was also one of the last to see Jesus die. She was part of that group of women who stayed by Jesus' side as he breathed his final labored breath and gave up his spirit only days before. Mary was from Magdala, a small fishing town on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. And Magdala means strong tower, it means strength or tower. We see something of Mary's strength in this story, something of her resolve, her dedication and her devotion to Jesus, who had miraculously healed her and radically redirected her life. Mary was a strong tower of faith and hope. So it's no wonder she remained by Jesus' side until the very end. And it's no wonder she's one of the first to return to the tomb that morning. Just try to imagine her racing thoughts, her elevated heart rate, her confusion, her panic, as Mary arrived at the tomb only to see the stone had already been removed from the entrance. And in John's account, John chapter 20, verse 1 and 2, we read that she was there, she saw the stone was rolled away, and she came running back to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." The narrative goes on to describe Peter and John racing to the tomb, including an amusingly specific detail that John, the one telling the story, reaches the tomb first. Then they both eventually entered the tomb and saw the linen cloths used to wrap Jesus' body. And not sure what to think, Peter and John hightailed it back to where they were staying. So let's pick up the thread here in John chapter 20, verse 11. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. And as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. And he asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was a gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." And she turned and cried out, "Teacher." Can you imagine this intimate moment between Mary and Jesus? Just take a minute to let that sink in. Have you ever cried so much that you could barely see, your eyes unable to focus through all the tears? I wonder if that's why Mary couldn't recognize Jesus. Or maybe she only glanced at him briefly, looking but not really seeing, her confusion and frustration clouding her perception of reality. What was it about Jesus saying her name, Mary, that suddenly flooded her soul with such clarity? Was it the tenderness in his voice? The same tenderness that saw her and spoke to her all those years ago when she was so broken and diseased? In that moment in time, there was one, only one, who could notice and name, who could experience and enjoy the risen Christ, Mary, a strong tower. And it reminds me of another moment in the grand biblical narrative, the story of Hagar in Genesis 16. All the way back, you may recognize that name, right? Hagar was Sarah's Egyptian servant or slave. God had made a promise to Abraham that he'd be the father of many descendants. Unfortunately, Abraham's wife, Sarai at the time, was unable to bear any children, so she offered her slave Hagar in order to hurry the process along. A descendant needed to be born, so Sarai asserted her power. Hagar, on the other hand, was voiceless, powerless, and helpless to resist. She was acted upon against her own will, first by Sarai and then by Abram. And to make matters worse, when Hagar became pregnant with Abram's firstborn heir, she was cruelly mistreated by Sarai. And rather than standing up for Hagar, Abraham turned a blind eye, telling his wife, "Do whatever you want. She's your slave." So many layers of injustice in this story. Unwilling to bear this abuse, Hagar runs away from the harsh mistreatment of her mistress into an even harsher cruelty of the desert. But that's not the end of the story, of her story. Listen to Genesis 16, 7 and 8. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was a spring that's beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Now, there are a couple things to notice here in verse 8. First, God is giving Hagar her dignity by inviting her to share her story, by giving Hagar her own voice. You see that? The question, where have you come from? Where are you going? It's as if God was saying to Hagar, I see you, and I care about what you've been through. Tell me what you've been experiencing. The other interesting thing to notice is that the angel of the Lord is the first character in the story to name Hagar directly. If you were to go back and read chapter 16 of Genesis, in Sarai's and Abram's dialogue, Hagar is an object, a slave, a piece of property, a thing, a transaction. But in God's language here, Hagar is an image bearer who has a name. I see you, Hagar. You see, names matter. It's just not possible to keep others at arm's length when we actually hear their stories, listen and call them by their real names, and choose to see them as divine image bearers who matter to God. Now, speaking of names, the story goes on to say the angel of the Lord names Hagar's son Ishmael because the Lord has heard her misery. And in turn, Hagar names God El Roi, the God who sees me. In being heard and seen by God, Hagar is able to see God too, to name God. There's something about those crushed by life who find themselves on the receiving end of cruelty and injustice that makes them more open, more receptive, more able to see God when others simply can't. In a book called Geography of Grace, the authors write that the Hagars of this world often catch sight of the scandalous nature of grace long before the Abrahams do. They say it's a matter of geography. It's a matter of geography. Grace, they would say, flows downhill and pools up at the lowest places. We're just going to take a break to remind you of our partner, A Simple Pause. It's an app for your phone, for your smart tablet. You can download it at any app store, whether you're an Apple user or an Android user. I was saying this app was free, but I recently recorded an interview with the developer and the creator, Luann Roberson. She said she prefers the language gift. She says this is a gift to people. And I love that. I love her heart. I love the sincerity, the generosity behind what she's putting out for you, to be able to just spend some quiet time, a few moments throughout your day with God. I'm excited to bring this interview to you coming up in the next few episodes. But in the meantime, download the app, spend a simple pause with God. All right, let's return to the reflection. Yeah, so we've talked about Hagar. We've talked about her experience of getting to name God, El Roi, the God who sees. It's essentially her image of God. What is God like? Let's return to the empty tomb, though, and to Mary's encounter with her teacher. It's no coincidence it was Mary of Magdala, the strong tower, who was the first to see Jesus with her own eyes. And Mary witnessed and proclaimed, I have seen the Lord. Mary, like Hagar, had a unique position to see and name God. And listener, so do you. How do you see God? What is God like to you? I don't know all your stories. I know mine. In the middle of your story, in the hurt, the brokenness, the cruelty, maybe the rejection, the heartache, the waiting, even the hopelessness? Who is it that comes to you and asks, where have you been? Where are you going? Or maybe Jesus is asking you a similar question as he asked Mary in the garden. Why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for? Your story matters. Your name matters. Your faith matters. Your I have seen the Lord testimony matters. Leonard Sweet recently posted some beautiful words. I love being able to share them with you. Online, he wrote, "You may feel like a solitary voice in a world ricocheting with racket and dissonance, but your words have the power to ignite change, to bring comfort, to lead others to the feet of the risen and rising Savior. God wants to use your single, precious, fragile thread to create something beautiful and eternal, a tapestry of truth that carries the greatest news the world's ever known." So what is God like? What is God like? What would be your answer to that question? If you were to sit with that, what imagination, what picture would begin to stir in you? What is God like? I know as I shared that with the people on Easter morning, one of the children handed a picture to me, and it was a picture of Jesus, and he was holding hands with two children, one on his left and one on his right. And Jesus had a big smile on his face. And I just thought, oh, what a great picture. This child is imaging Jesus as one who is happy to be with him, who's delighting in being close and being with him, children. I imagine he was one of those children. What is God like? How would you name God? From the depths of your story, from the depths of your experience, what is God like? In closing, allow me to read this beautiful poem by Malcolm Guite. It's called Sonnet 15, Easter Dawn. He blesses every love which weeps and grieves, and now he blesses hers who stood and wept and would not be consoled, or leave her love's last touching place, but watched as low light crept up from the east. A sound behind her stirs a scatter of bright birdsong through the air. She turns, but cannot focus through her tears, or recognize the gardener standing there. She hardly hears his gentle question, "Why? Why are you weeping?" Or sees the play of light that brightens as she chokes out her reply, "They took my love away. My day is night." And then she hears her name. She hears love say the word that turns her night into hours to day. The power of a single word, my friends, a single name, your name. Simply hearing your name spoken by Jesus has the power to turn your night to day. Well, thanks so much for listening to this episode, and would encourage you to pass it on to someone who you think might need to hear this message. We want everyone to know you have a story and it really matters. You have a name and it matters. And God can be known by you, and that really matters too. Let us know how we can help. Until next time, grace and peace.